I think Daoism was a lost connection with the Mother Earth. That it represented the root element of the tree, which has been kind of ignored later on in Christianity. So that nature, I think, the affinity to the natural world is the input that Daoism will make, in particular, in this congregation of the perennial philosophies at the next level. That is a unique thing that Daoism has. That's its unique genius in relation to understanding the actual significance of this incarnated, what this means, and the crystallized consciousness, because crystals are critical. Crystals are the basis of resonance as well, and oscillation, and that fits into your theories as well.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and Sifu, Daoist Master San Qing, and it's a welcome back moment. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. My dear friend James Tunney is back on the stage here at the podcast, and I'm just so grateful to have him. He's a scholar and author, and for anyone that doesn't know who he is, you're going to get to know him really well today, and he's going to help you explore the potential of all things spiritual consciousness. I corrected
Yes, yeah.
And so welcome back to the podcast, my dear friend. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much, San, and I'm glad to see your work unfolding. It was a pleasure the last time, and I know it's going to be a pleasure now. So I have a lot of questions to ask you, and a lot of issues to discuss that came up as I was thinking about it. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Yes. I mean, we spoke on so many things that the audience really enjoyed the deeper nature of our conversation, and today is going to be no different. There is just so many ways to enter into the now moment. But
I have maybe I could tell you what's coming true for me. So you've been working on the Tao Te Ching on your own version, as you explained, channeled, and you kindly sent me a copy of it. So do you have to explain to people what the document is before we proceed? I mean, for anyone that hasn't.
For most people, for anyone that interacts with my teaching, it's what we call a magical register. So it's a much deeper nature. It's like a reflection of the mother helping you return through the very words within what someone would perceive as a verse. We call it an incantation. It enters into this state of now moment, and you are able to remember who you really are. And it gives you that moment. It gives you that charge, just like that charge we're getting right now, that chill you're getting, the chill I'm getting, the expansive feeling is that knowing. And so that's really how we use it. And of course, it has levels of dimensions. But for anyone that's listening right now, that's generally the entry into remembering who you are, bringing you back to that. And that's what Daoists use it for. But I would love to hear your insight of what you just.
As I have explained before, so I won't go on about my interest in Daoism, and we've talked about that, so I won't go over that ground. When someone is coming towards Daoism, they often come through it by secondary sources. So a lot of people will come to the Tao of Physics, and that followed on, as people will know, from books like the Tao of Science from 1957, and this guy was interested in Shu. So he worked for the American government from Hawaii, I think, and he was involved in some big programs like food irradiation and that. So he was heavily involved in managerial science, and he sought from the 1940s to apply Daoist thinking to big projects, big management projects. So it's not necessarily a vision that people would associate with certain streams of Daoism. So there's all kinds of streams, and a person in your position, of course, has very particular emphasis, embracing in the whole. But my attraction to Daoism was based on this, kind of historically, was based on the affinity between it and Irish culture and Irish spiritual tradition, and that was the thing that it was immediately obvious to me that they were saying the same thing in different ways. So, as a scripture of one of the great scriptures in world spirituality, Daoism speaks on a number of different levels. So it's and over one's life, you approach it at different. You begin to see different levels. So in the context of martial arts, which we might elaborate on again, and for mutual interest, you can see how these principles were taken and applied in different contexts in relation to how one moves and how one fights. So I got your version, and I've read a good few versions, of course, as you have done. There are hundreds of versions of variable quality, as you well know, and of so there's a variety of people who think they're good at this sort of thing. So in relation to in trying to understand it and trying to approach your interpretation, I thought this I want to see, does this accord with something else that I'm thinking about at the moment? Does it? So my idea is that the great spiritual traditions have a commonality. In the core of it, if we take away the dross, if we take away all the hangers on, at the core of it, there are fundamental truths that are expressed in the different traditions and will always be there. You have to find them, you have to get through the institutions, but they're there. And that the moment that we are facing is that the people who have moved through the traditions have to come out at the top. And they have to begin to work together against the forces that are attacking the base of the tree of life, if you like, the ultra materialist, the military industrial complex. So the people through the traditions must engage in some kind of dialogue. Instead of finding difference, they have to engage in discourse, in dialogue, in imaginative linkage, in a resonance, or what I call accord. So this accord, we always have great words, but these things have to be applied in context and made relevant to the context. So I said when I was reading your version, there's a number of systems I could use to apply it on a different level. So when you approach the Tao Te Ching, in my case, it's a bit like the I Ching, insofar as one brings something to it, one brings something in an interactive way. So I'm very well disposed towards the Tao Te Ching. So I was wondering how, if we substitute the Tao or the concept for consciousness, for example, does it work? Or of course it does. There's two things I've been thinking about a lot recently. One, I'm writing about the nervous system. If we substitute some of the words in your work in relation to a description of the nervous system, which I think is critical, the nervous system of the earth, of us, and of the mechanical simulacrum, does it work for this? And I think it does. But the one that was most relevant to me, because I've been studying it a lot, which was curious, is about the Virgin Mary. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, the Virgin Mary, not interested, not so old hat." And in spirituality in the United States, there's a very strong anti-Christian bias. It's clear that, I mean, if you look at a lot of them, a lot of in California, that there's a really strong bias towards the tradition that they came from, which a lot of traditions say, well, you can't abandon the tradition. It can go wrong, but you have to look at some of the traditions that are important, or integrate, or find something in them. And in many ways, a lot of people don't understand that there is a simulacrum spiritual tradition, particularly in the United States, which I believe is designed to support the military industrial complex. That there are certain people that are promoted, because it doesn't represent a threat, because there's nothing there. There's no tradition. Whereas if you take Daoism, for example, we had all these times in Daoism where they were escaping from central power. They were going to the mountains, the seven sages, the bamboo grove, all this. The Magnificent Seven, the seven samurai. That idea goes back to Daoism. This idea of seven people who might save the world, for example. That goes back to the tradition, and the idea of escape to the mountains is one. So we have this dynamic in Daoism as well. So in relation to the Virgin Mary is an interesting thing. So I was looking through your translation, and as I'm reconceiving the role of the Virgin Mary in European history and in world history, actually, it's quite an amazing story. It's interesting in parapsychology as well. And I talk to people in parapsychology, and a lot of people in parapsychology, they're interested in spectacular things kind of now. Sometimes if you say, well, about these traditions that have been around, they're not really interested in, because they see them as separate in some ways. If you see in parapsychology, there's a different emphasis that, well, that's kind of religious or something, and you know what I mean. And so I'm quite open to the complexity of the spiritual universe. So there was a few questions I was going to ask you, and in particular, in verse 6, you used the word immaculate. Now, this I think that's correct, and this doesn't come up in the other a lot of the other versions. It doesn't, when they're talking about the feminine and the female, and you use that word immaculate, and that struck me as it's interesting. And of course, so what I did was I held up my evolving lens in relation to the Virgin to your version of the Tao Te Ching, and I found a remarkable consistency between them, a remarkable resonance, and that was one of the words, immaculate, as distinct from the other traditions, because this is a word which is used in relation to the Virgin Mary. And in fact, today, funnily enough, under the traditional Catholic approach before it was changed, today is the feast of the Immaculate Heart of the Virgin Mary, which is a curious connection. It's a different one. They call it the Queenship of Mary, etc. And Mary is an interesting figure because she's what distinguishes really Protestantism and Catholicism. The Protestants say, well, the Virgin Mary, you can't worship the Virgin Mary, and the Catholics worship the Virgin Mary, which is not true. It's not true. The vision of the Virgin Mary was as a human who was unique in relation to she was immaculately conceived as well, or without sin, and that she was fulfilling a destiny that goes back to Genesis, where she defeats the snake, really, in the end. That's right at the start of Genesis. But you're not worshiping her. She's a mediatrix. She is the way to move to the higher. Now this is, as you know, in the verses of the Tao Te Ching, there's about this: the female is the entrant, the mother of all things. Well, this is what the Virgin Mary figure is. Now, some people might say, well, I don't believe in all that kind of stuff. Take it as an archetype if you can't, or as a myth if you want to. And you say, well, of course, this is some representation of the, continues on from Isis and all this kind of stuff. Fair enough, but we're talking about a figure who actually existed. Whatever way they existed, there's a lot of evidence that this figure existed, or that Christ had a mother, etc. Whatever other elements we can put it in a mythic sense. So you use that word, and that kind of immediately said, okay, well, this is a reflection of another tradition. I'm not saying deliberate. I'm saying that this is in accord with something else. This tradition, which says that the female, the mother of all things, the mother of God, Theotokos, is a critical figure in relation to our understanding of the world. And so right at the start in verse 1, and it moves between, because you have the Tao and you have the sage. So there's a movement between them, and again, you could see that as Christ and or God and the Mother from the earth. So that reflects how you begin in verse 1. And then there's qualities which we associate with the sage and the Tao, which are clear in all the ways. But so in verse 2, you get the selfless sense. Now, this is, you say, well, there's a lot of traditions, mythical approaches, which don't encourage selflessness, don't encourage this thinking, or removing yourself from your own interest. But this is in Taoism, we see this emphasis, and we also see it in relation to, again, the Virgin Mary tradition, the mother giving up things, selfless. It mirrors it very, very much. And even the idea of the sage, well, the Virgin Mary is the sede sapientes. She's the seat of wisdom. But wisdom is associated with the female, and a different type of wisdom. So people forget that. So when you see this picture in Western art of the Virgin, the Madonna with the child, she's on a seat. This is the symbolism about the seat of wisdom. And this is the same idea that underpins the Tao Te Ching in relation to wisdom associated with the female. So then you go on in verse 5 and about there's a light and the heart, and verse 6, which is critical in my analogy, and also this idea of the Immaculate Heart. It's kind of, I heard this growing up, and like everyone else, you go through different relationships with some of these ideas. You hear them by rote, and they don't mean anything. Immaculate Heart, what does that mean? But after having studied this idea of the Immaculate Heart, I mean, it's critical in European history from 1917 and the Secrets of Fatima. Profound effect on people like John Paul, who was involved in the change of the fall of the Soviet Union. And when he's at a critical time during the fall of the Soviet Union, he goes to Częstochowa in Poland, which is associated, because there's a center associated with the Virgin Mary there, a monastery which has a picture of the Black Madonna, which interestingly has two cuts on the face, which I was there just about the time before I went to Vienna in the summer, and then an odd connection was I hear about Trump, and you see the two lines of the face, and it was a very odd connection. But this is the archetypal nature of reality, the way things jumble into. I'm not making any deeper connection with that. But in verse 7, you have the flower, and the flower is fundamentally associated with the Virgin Mary. In many of the apparitions, the people smell roses, rose petals fall, things like roses fall. There is one apparition in Italy which has been recognized, an apparition called Our Lady of the Mystic Rose. The rose is fundamentally associated as a symbol, as a physical symbol, as a thing which is actualized. And again, that blossoming flower is there. The connection with water, verse 8 on through the Tao Te Ching. So you have anyone that has approached the Tao Te Ching knows that water is the fundamental motif. Water is fundamentally involved with anything about the Virgin Mary. So usually, say Lourdes, for example, it's fundamentally associated with a spring, that the apparition directs the child, the person, to a spring. Same in La Salette in France, and a whole range. In there are tears. There's Akita, the sister Agnes in Akita in Japan, who died during the week, God rest her. She was deaf, and her hearing was restored after an apparition, and there was a statue that cried. And well, again, you have this water connection. It's a fundamental connection. So that purity is associated with a kind of natural connection, a healing connection, a water, which is absolutely fundamental in Taoism. One cannot come near Taoism without understanding how water is critical. So again, we have this, and it's a fundamental link between it. And associate with that, which again, verse 12 and 9, the selfless nature and the humble nature of water flowing to the lowest level, and the power of humility. So this is not. We're more interested now to power and humiliation, as opposed to the strength of people. Don't really believe that there's a strength to be gained by going to the lowest level, or how powerful that is. But that's a clear thing about the theology of the Virgin Mary. Light in verse 12 is light at heart. Dao De Jing, the Virgin Mary tradition, is the same on that in relation to sources of light. And one, there's a couple of more specific. So I think the Immaculate one jumped out on me, but there was two other ones that there was the number one, verse 73 about the carpenter. She's married to a carpenter. The son works and Jesus works. It's a very specific motif to take out of the church. You can take out a lot of ones, but the carpenter, it's kind of an echo. We have in verse 53 about the fields, and the verses about the fields being barren and all this. In La Salette, she was talking about the fields that were going to be barren through famine, and it did happen in France. We have this concern with the natural world and the relationship with the natural world, and what's going to happen when you don't interact in a holistic way with the world. In verse 15, there's the muddy water, and this was the thing that, another little detail that kind of jumped out when I was kind of primed to look at it, because Bernadette at Lourdes, in one of there was a lot of skepticism about what was going on. They could see that the girl was in ecstasy, to see that she was seeing something. A lot of pressure from the authorities to deny that anything was happening. And one of the most curious aspects of the apparition, which turned some people off at the time, was that Bernadette was there, and she began to dig with her hands in the soil in the grotto. And there's another connection: the cave, the grotto. There's always caves near where the Virgin Mary appears. The grotto is critical in Lourdes. You see this a number of the places where she appears. There's caves, and this cave grotto motif is in the Dao De Jing. So there was a big crowd at this stage looking at Bernadette receiving her vision, and then she starts digging in the ground, and she starts eating a plant which was grown by. Now she's being told to do so. Now obviously, people thought she was mad, and that this wasn't consistent with any divine intervention. So she had mud over her face, and there was muddy water there, which is why it's relevant. But that's where the spring subsequently appeared. It began to trickle afterwards, and then the spring that wasn't there before emerged and became critical in relation to ideas of healing and the hundreds of documented cases of healing scientifically that have occurred there. So that muddy water connection, the connection between the cave, purity coming out of this muddy water, it was a curious connection. The last one I'll mention that struck me was verse 4 about the twisted knots, and about knots in verse 4. And one of the apparitions or visions, it wasn't an apparition, it was a vision of the Virgin Mary that led to a painting. And this is another crucial bit about the Virgin Mary, the image, which we'll have to mention. But so you have apparitions, you have visions, dreams, and you also have a lot of locutions where the Virgin Mary is talking to the person. And they often tell the person to have a piece of art commissioned, to have an image made. This is a recurrent thing. It's a very strange thing, and it's taken me a long time to try to understand why that would be, why a divine source would say, a picture done. It's and this is a distinction between Catholicism and Protestantism and Judaism and Islam, because in Islam and Judaism you don't have this representation of the human figure in sacred form, and Protestantism reacted against that in a very hostile way. But it's central in Catholicism, the idea of the sacredness of the human figure in its relationship to the divine, and the significance of the representation of that. And that's the basis of the Western art tradition. It was actually a bit, there was differences early on in Islam, but that's another story. But so this image element is a distinctive element, and there is a peculiarity associated with the Virgin Mary. But so there was a picture, and the picture was commissioned in 1690 after one of these visions, and it was of Our Lady, the Undoer of Knots. Our Lady, the Undoer of Knots. So it was the idea that Our Lady could undo, not whatever way you want to conceive that, something that was difficult to something, and there's a picture of that, and that the knot in verse 4. There it is again. So going through the thing, based on my assumption that the higher level, what we're experiencing is at the higher level, is the people, you retain your tradition, but you have to bring it up so that it becomes useful in dialogue with other people that are at that level, so that we can have cooperation to oppose the attack on spiritual consciousness by the mechanization and automation of the human body. But actually, there's a very strong reinforcement from reading the Tao Te Ching and reading your version of it, which corresponds with the emphasis of the power of the female in the Virgin Mary tradition, of the ultimate success of the power of the female, of its association with simplicity, purity, water, natural places, understanding them, of the selflessness element of understanding what that is, and they correspond very, very well. And in fact, so when I'm approaching the idea of what does the Immaculate Heart meant, and now, so for example, in the Fatima, according to the Secrets of Fatima, there's a dispute over them, but really the one of the key things was that the Pope was supposed to dedicate or consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This was a critical. And people say, well, what will that achieve? But we're talking about different levels of reality, and that was crucial. And she said, we're in the apparitions. Ultimately, Russia would happen. That we're going to have this kind of conversion. And people might say, well, that's all stories, and you know what I mean. It's all history. And if you look at the history of Europe and the history of Christendom, the Virgin Mary is a critical story, not just in a symbolic way, but actually there's a presence in a lot of the military, in an awful lot of battles. There's countless stories of apparitions of the Virgin Mary stopping an advancing force. I mean, there's from the other side in the Franco-Prussian War, in relation to the Ottoman Empire, examples in the Iberian Peninsula when the Christians were getting rid of the Moors who had been there for 800 years. People don't understand. So you have this different element and about the relationship with actual martial context. So a lot of people assume that the figure is a kind of weak figure, but that doesn't accord with history. So what I would say is that when one comes to an idea, well, what does that mean, the Immaculate Heart or whatever, and then when one looks at other traditions, in this case in Daoism, and you see that there's a notion there, that there's a reflection of some higher spirit, some higher consciousness, some fundamental aspect of the universe, the Tao, that helps you from that way get a different angle, a parallax that enables you to approach it and say, yeah, well, that's if it comes up in that context as well, I can understand what we're getting at, how it might mean something directly to me. So so again, it was great to come at it again from a different perspective, and that leads me to consider, which I have been doing, the significance of which I have been doing this anyway, is understanding where this figure, say the Virgin Mary in Europe, where that fits in the context of a battle for humanity, which perhaps we can come back to. But that was my first thought. I don't know what you feel about that, or whether you think I was, or how you feel about that.
No, I think it's profound how you can take this, the Tao Te Ching, Tao Te Ching, how people perceive it. As I mentioned, it's a magical register for a Taoist seeker. Part of the journey to return to who they are is to remember, and you remember that. And fundamentally within Taoist alchemy, you return to the mother. This is contradictive to all the alchemical processes that most people peddle within this construct. If you look at any sort of like so-called teachers of Nigong, they will misdirect you and have you burn the very core of yourself out, that high young energy, until there is no more material. There is no more evidence of that physical flesh, because that happens when you attempt to extend that energy. You must always return to the primordial mother. And so from an alchemical process, we have the dantians, the energy field. We return them to the energy, basically what we call nidan, which is internal alchemy. And that regulates and has you return to the true ecosystem that is a reflection of perfection that we call the diamond. And so the perfection is the mother. And so within the system I train people in, this is upper dantian is the sun, the middle dantian is the earth, the lower dantian is the moon, which contradicts all alchemical processes from any alchemist you could speak of, whether it's material or you are fundamentally talking about the energetic potential. And when people understand you go deep into the primordial mother, this is where you have the true essence to all things. This is the return. As we speak of the bellows, which is the sum of all things, you are contracting and expanding all the time. That's all you're doing. And you have the opportunity to realize that within that you're all things and nothing at the same time, is that moment, what we call the Wu Ji, the stillness, which you enter the mother of all things. And that's when we turn it into creativity, as James and I were briefly speaking of before the podcast, is that flow state that we talk of. Within Daoism, we call it the Wu Wei, the effortless action, the effortless effort is that flow state where the possibilities are abundant, timeless, endless, limitless, infinite, and that retains the knowing. And so when we look at a platform of spiritual warfare, where people are being impregnated into their psyche with what they perceive as the need to not reproduce, the need to have self-hatred, the need to destroy the physical form and the nucleus of the bond of the yin and yang energy, i.e. the reflection of the man and the woman, is the very self-evidence of this parasite that is bringing people to a point of no return, as they continually be, from a government perspective, psyoped into believing that this is the true nature of who you are, when in actuality you are being more and more removed from that, using these fundamental mechanisms. And of course, from a spiritual perspective, this gets deep into robbing you of your true self, of your knowing. And this is where Daoism has this fond relationship, and we're speaking of the correlation between the mother and the Tao, and how we speak of it. And then, of course, I always return to people on a Gnostic path as a very self-realization. It's your knowing. And the reason that Taoism is not being expressed at a higher level is because we go straight to the center of knowing who you are, returning to who you are, and that has no trappings or deception from someone else giving you information. You find it for yourself. Know thyself. Self-evidence realization, and the alchemy gives you that scary, this is real. This is really taking place. I'm able to maestro this very moment. I'm able to connect what I consider just a thought or consciousness of some spirituality and commandeer this physical body and make it a vehicle, which is a reflection of that within this construct, within this dimension. And this is where people get so confused. And it's so beautiful when yourself, myself, come to this realization where it's all coming back and you cannot deny it. The message will continue to resonate. And this is that part where people discover that simplicity of resonance and what that means, but they're creating and they're remembering through these lenses. And that's what the Daoism does when I'm teaching it through my teachers, through that lens, is helping people remember who they are, returning to that knowing, so they have the ability to raise the conscious collective, the spiritual collective, to remember, to embrace humanity, as this is a reflection of this experience that we're having on planet Earth, is the selflessness, the servitude that is the true core of everything. And so that servitude, that chill that we're getting, that embracing expansion that we are having right now, is that very knowing. And people, they feel as though they're bad actors and they're all about their self-interest. But in reality, when you return, your selflessness, your servitude is serving yourself when you become whole. But there is a path that takes place to decipher that and remember. And I feel like you and I are speakers and keepers of that very insight and of information, and helping people return to that very knowing.
Yeah, and it was interesting in some of the studies of the Tao Te Ching. They talk about its reception in Europe and the Royal Society getting copies in 1788, and the Jesuits were getting copies, and there was debates about, is this a true version, etc. But interestingly, early on, some of the first people that got it said, well, this is consistent with Christianity. The core method, that was an interesting element that people have forgotten. They could see in it. And that has been kind of downplayed a bit, because there's of course a whole range of schools in Daoism, and they're not all the same thing. So I'm not making superficial comparisons, but in relation to the great traditions, there are cores that we can find out worked out over time. So that was an interesting. That's an interesting element of the historical reception of Daoism in the West, and also by scientists or by people that were in the scientific milieu, in the Royal Society, etc., in Britain. But the reason why I came to focus on the Virgin Mary in recent times, and I will write about it, is because you have to look at the mindset of the people who want to disestablish what has been there, or to dispirit us. So really, you have to look at it from their mindset, or even without looking at people who are operating on a kind of nefarious level. There was a famous essay or a chapter in a book, The Education of Henry Adams, by Henry Adams, one of the famous Adams family, the political family in the United States, and he came to Europe to a great exhibition. And one of the chapters in his relation of the story was the dynamo and the virgin. And he went to the great exhibition, and he was enthralled by the dynamo and the power of electrical machines, and he was mesmerized by it. And he saw that that would be a great thing that would be, well, worshipped, if you like, in the future. It was something that had this mystical quality from its power. And he said, well, what's the contrast to that? Now, if you travel around Europe, which I've done a lot in the last couple of years, you're struck everywhere in the history of Europe by the representation, the pictures, the stories of apparitions of the Virgin Mary. It's from top to bottom. It's quite interesting. And when you're looking at it, it's really remarkable. So the Virgin Mary represented that feminine mystical element as well in Europe. And the dynamo will displace it. I mean, it's not a happy coexistence. It's an effort to displace it. But it's more specific if we look at it from a nefarious perspective, because if you look at the mother, the womb, which is, blessed art thou, and thy womb. And I'm talking about the fruit of the womb. So the womb is critical. And that, of course, is matrix. That's what the matrix is. That's what the word comes from the mother and the womb. So when we're talking about a matrix, we're talking about a womb. So this is a thing that, if people want to understand the simulacrum society, the takeover of society, the mindset of the military-industrial complex, it's been trying to set up a simulacrum for anything that's good. And they even do this in relation to artificial intelligence companies. If you listen to the head of NVIDIA, the big AI company, he explains that when they're setting up an artificial or intelligence system to manage another system, they set up a kind of simulation, so they play out the scenarios between the two. So the simulacrum, the copy, is interesting to see how something will behave. So as they are making digital copies of us, there will be that's what they're doing. They will be able to predict what's going to happen to us, how we will behave in particular, and then use that information with artificial intelligence to affect us, to get us to do what they want. But the simulacrum also is critical in order to replace what's there already. So the matrix that they are making is a mechanical reproduction of what the true matrix, the true womb, the true maternal, the true mother of all things. So that's what the matrix is a reference to. And it even has specific connotations. So when we get to the film The Matrix, we have this ectogenesis. We have people being, born in wombs. This is what the leading scientists in Britain decided was going to happen in the 1920s. That they were going, and now there's plenty of articles in feminist literature explaining that ectogenesis is crucial to make men and women equal. That children will be born in these sacs. Now, this is a very, very serious policy that's really ongoing. But this is a deliberate attempt to ape, if you like, the sacred, ape in the sense of copy. This is a fundamental characteristic which was in medieval times associated with the satanic. It was trying to copy something that was there. So in Gnostics, they talk about the counterfeit, but the counterfeit is really something which is made by someone in order to take power off. So another word, in the first prayer to the Virgin Mary, it goes back 3rd century and earlier. She's described as the generatrix or genetrix. So the genetrix, and that's the in relation to the Mother of God, and this now that word is used for biotech. It's a specific company name. It's the attempt again. I'm not saying they're deliberately doing that, but they are this is what they are doing. They're creating the mechanical matrix. So every characteristic associated with, whether you approach it from the Tao Te Ching in a proper interpretation, or you approach it from a Christian perspective, is an attempt to create a substitute. Now, it's even more specific, as I've mentioned a number of times. If you look at how Ireland changed from a country that would have been attached to the Virgin Mary in many senses. All of a sudden, 1980, we get Virgin Airways coming in, Virgin, the simulacrum. You get Madonna on MTV, Madonna. It's a deliberate, it's not accidental. So what a feature of this movement in the military-industrial complex has been to replace anything which stands in its way. And one of the big things in Europe is that link with the Virgin and the image of the snake as well. People don't really, what does this snake mean? So in Genesis, we have the woman ultimately triumphs. It's the woman that triumphs over the snake. So that's the prediction for the kind of end time. There's the woman or the seed of the woman. There's various interpretations, not in Revelation, but in Genesis itself. So the triumphs over the snail that will attack the heel, but she will stand on the head of that, or her seed will hand. So this is meant to be an anticipation of Jesus, whatever, loads of different interpretations. But that's one was clear. So you say, well, what's the snake? Now I have books there that describe all the meanings of the serpent in ancient literature, and the positive ones actually outweigh the negative ones. But obviously, this snake was not the talking snake. It meant something different. And if you look through the literature associated with Benjamin Franklin or others, the snake is a very positive image for the coordination. It was used in relation to the American states. He described in a famous cartoon, "Join or Die." They had to join together. They had to come together to get the power, and that power was represented by the snake. So in many senses, for me, the snake represents other things. It represents concentrated power. It represents the cords that lay the foundations of the telecommunication system. These images I mentioned about Adams seeing, or his interpretation of the Great Exhibition, the Virgin and Dynamo. Dostoevsky saw when he saw the Great Exhibition in London, he saw that in this technology was Baal and Moloch, the gods from the Middle East and Babylon and that area, or modern Israel. He saw them in the technology. So we have this very, very close affinity between the sense of not a neutral idea of technology, but the idea of technology as a destructive force. And for people in an Islamic tradition, I'd refer to Sayyid Hussein Nasser, who's written about knowledge and sacred from a perennial perspective. And he talks about Promethean man representing the scientific man power who defies the gods against the human as pontifex. So pontifex is the bridge between heaven and earth. And this is also a very strong Daoist idea about this connection between heaven and earth. It's the same in all the perennial traditions, that's where the human is, and that's what the connection is important. It's not the person who says, I'm going to defy heaven, because you can't do that. You're going to lose. You shouldn't be doing that. The gods, you don't have power over the heavens in that sense. And this is the mistake. So, and last one on this, and again, people may say, well, that's a bit loose, that's a bit speculative, but really, you as an artist as well, understand the power of the image and understand the history of the image. And in a number of the apparitions, the Virgin Mary instructs this image to be made. In the famous apparition in Paris, in the Rue de Bac, I think, to Catherine Labouré in 1830, she instructed the nun to create a medal, which became the miraculous medal. It became the miraculous medal because afterwards it was associated with any amount of healing. So there's billions of these things being made offer protection. Some might see that as an amulet or something, but this is a divine construct. And you say, well, why would the Virgin Mary offer or ask something be constructed out of metal? There is a symbology associated with turning metal into positive use, like turning weapons into plowshares. There's that connotation. But in the image that was instructed, there's a reference to the Virgin have standing on a globe over the snake. So we had this realization again, or this indication that there was something global, there was something bad in a global sense, and that the feminine force was the triumphant one. And on the back of it, there's this the letter M with a T over it. So strangely, well, as I said, MTV was a negative force. It looks like MTV kind of logo in a different form. I think there's a deeper element to the choice of certain symbologies, but the letter M is what strikes you. So the letter M is the key thing. So here we have, and the body of this nun is still preserved. I mean, in Paris, but so it was the basis of a huge movement around the world. It was very profound effects. This apparition and this medal. So the M is critical. And you say, well, what's that about? I'm going around Europe this summer and last summer and looking at a lot of the Marian sites. In between, you see an M when you're going around all the time. It's McDonald's, and now it has reduced. It has reduced to a letter M. So you'll see a sign. Nothing else about the letter M, which is 50 kilometers away. It's unbelievable. So I can't. I know people will find that strange, but in terms of magic, if you like, in terms of the juxtaposition of images, in terms of a deep battle for symbology, to go around Europe and just now there's nothing about McDonald's on these, just a letter M. To bear in mind that this M had a different meaning. That, well, you could argue that one is a premonition of the other, or one is a attempt to create a simulacrum of the other. But the idea that there's no relationship is I find it hard to believe. So the point of that is that it seems to me that in the mind of the people who want the dynamo to succeed, who want us to live in an electrical world and to fit the human into the electrical grid, which is what the objective is, to move away from their inherent creation in light, that what they're doing is appropriating the totality of the sacred symbolism. And in particular, in the European context, this is associated with the Virgin Mary. In other contexts, there's different association. It's an attack on the power of on the mother, the feminine, the productive, the natural, the generative, in order to create this thing, the Promethean man, the creator that creates, recreates the human, that turns them into machines, that turns them into silicon, that makes the men and women that make them the creators, the new gods. So there's a direct relationship. So funny enough, if one looks at the literature, the critical literature, and one looks at the sacred symbolism, there's a battle going on there that most people will not be aware of. But it's a meaningful one, which is why it's important to emphasize, to re-emphasize from a number of different perspectives what these ancient sources are telling us, and why they're trying to speak to us, and why they're trying to inspire artists and writers and mystics to reassert the spiritual and the image, and to explain it.
Well, yeah, I mean, when people start to understand the simplicity of Daoism in of itself, and part of the reason it was erased was, generally speaking, that, you know, we were the keepers of that connectivity between the universe and the seeker. And part of the incredible mystic journey of a Daoist seeker is to realize that you are in possession of the mirroring effect of that. You can be at one with it. This physical flesh that you see before you is nothing more than a vehicle to record and the tuning fork to your experience. And it's here on basically magnifying and magnetizing yourself to planet Earth as part of the journey of that Taoist seeker, is to remember this selflessness, this servitude, this love that is within everything, and that is perfection. And so when we look at perfection, we go, okay, perfection is the mother. And your distortion, as my dear friend Martin would say, a Buddhist monk, the dukkha, the distortion of this reality, is your attention intention cutting from that cloth and creating and forming what we perceive as this energetic potential, this materialized viewpoint that you're having that is separating you from the mother, that magnetized reality. And that magnetic fluidity is the very answer to that. All rivers return back to the ocean, as we would say. And when you realize that that is abundant, timeless, endless, limitless, you will be mesmerized by returning. Nothing will stop you. The seeker will never step away from the path of realizing and remembering, because that is that intuitive state of knowing, that is that visceral experience that every seeker has. And they get removed by it because they're basically manipulated by the parasites within that are operating all around us, i.e. the very construct and the dialogue of history, and how James is able to decipher it through this symbolism that is returning you to this material, limited view of what the truth really is. And so when you do this, all of a sudden people are, oh my goodness, the power of numerology just in of itself, where within Daoism, the path is always, the highest point is 9. And when you look at that 9, what just so happens to be from conception to birth, human life, 9 months. And all of a sudden people go, oh, I just got what you were saying, Jifu. Wow. Well, within Taoism, there's the creation of the cosmos. And the keepers of that creation are supreme purity, jade purity, highest purity, which are my teachers. And they reside within the upper dantian, which is supreme purity, the keeper of light, the middle dantian, jade purity, the keeper of information, the lower dantian, highest purity, the keeper of energy. And so all these things come together within you, a macro of a micro, as we start to realize this, and how deep it's been perpetrated and really propagated by these forces that are attempting to continue to separate you throughout history. And it becomes so much more clear as you go on that path. And so that magnetic fluidity, the potential, the perfection is within all of us. Yet just a simple thing like Daoist cultivation, because within Daoism, we're always the advisor to the emperor. The first person that would be executed is the Daoist alchemist, because you have way too much access to that now moment, and there cannot be anyone with more power than the emperor. And so that's why Daoism was stomped out by many megalomaniacs that were reigning over Chinese culture over thousands of years, because of that very reason. And there would be this cyclical cycle of spirituality, atheism, religion, realizing that on a Taoist path as a Taoist priest, I teach all things, whether it's the metaphysics to the philosophy to just the religious aspects. And it's so important, and I think James would agree with me, to honor the very roots and origins of those things, whether it's Catholicism, Judaism, Hinduism, Daoism, Buddhism. They all have this incredible magnetic amplitude that the seeker of that scripture, right down to a subatomic level, is so powerful. And this is what gets us all warm and fuzzy inside, why we're feeling this charge right now, is what gravitates you to that truth, returning to that knowing. Yet people want to separate you from your belief. Everyone goes, oh, all this religious stuff is the same. Like the disconnect, the conscious agency that people want to start throwing these words in to really push you away from who you really are and keep you in that very stagnated, mechanistic, material state that you will not remember. You will be bound by the mundane, and as it will present itself, even though it's always happening. Energy is created as we breathe, as we speak. And what people do is get caught in that electromagnetism, which is the limitation. When you realize that the mother, God, Tao, Buddha, is perfection, it's not from this electromagnetic spectrum. Yet people want to stay there. And within the Taoist alchemy, I have yet to, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I have yet to find someone that can teach true Taoist alchemy, because they look at me like, you're out of your mind. You tell me the cauldron is the lower cultivational purpose of the fire, and you culminate the fire in water. Oh, no. And then when I show them examples, they go, holy moly, this stuff is real. Oh, 100%. And that's why the ability to tap in and maestro the 50 trillion cells of this physical flesh gives you that self-evidence and realization that by cultivating these practices, we call it absorbing the riches, absorbing the chi, saturating the physical flesh, you can extend the mortality. Because we always remind people, remind the man mortality is real. So when you realize that you are not of this physical body, Jade Emperor always says, when you believe, when you know you are not of this body, what can harm you? Nothing. Now you go, okay, I'm the seeker. I'm really the seeker. But I want to extend this incarnation, this reincarnation, where I am right now. How do I do that? You nourish the physical flesh so that you continue your journey. Whereas there are a lot of belief systems and paths where they'll just throw it away like an avatar. Now, I understand that. That's personal preference. That's not part of the Taoist seeker's path. It's to nourish it and to embrace immortality and bring it to this physical flesh for the extended period of time that that cultivation is possible.
Yes, I mean, there's very interesting niches as I was studying Daoism in relation to alchemy and kind of more occult elements as well in different streams that were very, very esoteric. So they wouldn't, and I mean, that's in all the traditions. So those things are, every tradition has that. They're in Tibetan Buddhism as well. People don't understand about some of those things that would be described as occult in the West. Or even in Christianity, they forget that a lot of the saints were dealing with or surrounded by demon figures and all that. That was the nature of their existence. They understood that they were around. That's not unusual in any of the traditional paths. When you said about figure 9, of course, 9 is critical and associated as well with the Virgin Mary. People pray a novena 9 days, 9 days with the apostles after Christ went and the Holy Spirit came down as a symbol of this. It's a critical connection. The design of churches was in a 9 shape, going back to Armenia and that in the early Christian churches. It was critical aspect. There's two bits that come up out of as we're talking that press forward. One is again the power of the image, and I was explaining that it's critically associated with the Virgin Mary again and again. Like, for example, there was a thing that people wear a scapular around their necks because it was associated with an apparition in the 1200s in England. There's a number of different ones where a person wears an image of the Virgin Mary or whatever, or associated thing as a protection, which is a very old tradition, of course, but this is recurrent. But the image is critical, same as the medal, the same as being asked to do a picture or a painting. So there's an emphasis on the power of the image. And we see this also in relation to the instructions to represent the holy face, the face of Christ, which is very significant because I've been doing pictures on that recently, and you see this week the again studies of the Turin Shroud, which they tried to say was false, but again, there's a lot of evidence that said that, well, this actually came from that time, the Turin Shroud, and there's very interesting studies about how the image was imprinted, and there's various theories that suggest that it was imprinted by a sudden burst of light on the shroud. But again, the image is critical, and in all of this, there's an emphasis on the human form and human. I don't want to use the word flourishing. I don't want to use the word flourishing. Human welfare, not to the exclusion of the spiritual. Certain people are going to suffer. That's in the thing, and the leaders have to suffer in a way. The sacrifice. That's the other thing that I was going to mention to you or come back to you. I want to share some thoughts on that. But this idea of the nurturing bit is there. I think Daoism was a lost connection with the Mother Earth. That it represented the root element of the tree, which has been kind of ignored later on in Christianity, in particular in Protestantism, and even in Catholicism. But it wasn't ignored in the early stages. If we look in the 9th century, the 800s, and we look at the writings of Erugena from Ireland, who could understand the Greek language when there wasn't many that could do, and translated the Greek text and wrote about his conception of God. There was the Book of Nature and the sacred books. So that nature was fundamental theologically. And subsequently, again, there's been various takeovers of the church. So there's traditions that survive within the church or on the margin, or they're marginalized. And this is the ebb and flow. The exact same has happened in relation to Taoism. Sometimes they're forced out, sometimes they're forced to, and sometimes they sneak back in, or certain figures remain. So that nature, I think the affinity to the natural world is an input, is the input that Daoism will make, in particular in this congregation of the perennial philosophies at the next level. That is a unique thing that Daoism has. That's its unique genius in relation to understanding the actual significance of this incarnated, what this means, and the crystallized consciousness, because crystals are critical, and crystals are the basis of resonance as well, and oscillation, and that fits into your theories as well. So the image is important, and it plays out in remarkable ways that people don't really understand or notice. For example, a lot of people don't know that Salvador Dali was very interested in Fatima, and he went and he met Sister Lucia, one of the original children, when she was behind a grill and a nun, and according to a book he went written, which I believe he had a kind of experience. He came back to religion and had a confession, and it was associated with him trying to paint, or being commissioned to paint, a vision of hell. So he did this painting for an American organization that was interested in Fatima. It's an interesting picture. It's not one of us. You don't see it so much in the canon, but we had this focus on the image again. Kind of an artist being kind of led to make an image of something that was related in another context. And this is a curious thing, because the more I listen to certain very successful contemporary spiritual leaders, the more I hear an emphasis on the lack of consequences for your actions in this world. You can do anything. It's all, what you do doesn't matter, because there's all this conscious. This is a character of what I hear, but I hear a lot of this. In many ways, you don't exist. You're not a person. There's all this consciousness, and there's a game going on, and therefore it doesn't matter. And of course, there's no punishment, and anything you can do is all right. There's no problem, and it's all kind of love and all this kind of stuff. And any of those bad things, like I was listening to Zukov and saying fear and all that. None of that is real. It doesn't. And associated with that, of course, you couldn't have any idea of hell. You couldn't have any idea of, although this is what Salvador Dali was trying to reproduce, because the children had, in a number of things, had a vision of hell. And then people say, well, hell can't exist. Why would a God punish people and all this kind of stuff? And you have this conflict between this kind of modern view, the idea that there's no consequences to any of your actions, and the idea that this thing is a made up thing to induce fear. Now, I'm not going into. I'm not suggesting we go into the whole thing of hell, but what is interesting is that when you talked before about some of your friends who are no longer with us and who couldn't see a way forward, obviously, even in this life, you can enter into hellish zones. By definition, that's why people want to escape. But people seem to think that they couldn't encounter something else which was hellish in another thing. And what's a curious thing to me, of course, is that in the Chinese tradition, they do have conceptions of hell. So I'm interested to hear what or how you interpret, or how you fit into your world picture that the idea of hell, because Daoism, it's there somewhere. There's various conceptions of hell, and of course that can be a reflection of the describing circumstances here, and the describing the spiritual world, and the project, etc. What's your or how would you give a person a synopsis of your view of that in the tradition?
Well, within Taoism, I mean, it's very clear we look through the lens of a seeker as yin and yang. The energies are potential. That's part of your journey within this dualism that we consider your viewpoint of a human experience. Then you start to decipher and realize, as a Taoist seeker, there's so much more to what you perceive in front of you. Now, what the potential of yin and yang is determinative by the seeker themselves. So, as an ordained priest who has been doing exorcisms for decades, that's potential is very real. So is the potential of nothing but an expansive moment being at one with the mother. This is part of the journey as a human being to decipher this and to realize that part of that oscillating, polarizing effect of this planet Earth experience is to be able to realize that is the polarizing effect. So you can observe it as yin and yang, or you can start to realize there are parasites that are manipulating your perception, and then you will bring in very clear evidence of entities that are coming from these realms that we call heaven and hell. And they're very tangible, very real, very manipulative, and can quite easily give you this sort of like what you perceive as some type of like echoing effect in your mind, that you're eating the chocolate donut for the betterment of your wellness. You're drinking the beer for the betterment of your wellness. You're doing things that are clearly self-destructive to this physical body, yet you're justifying them within that ecosystem. And so as a Taoist, you start to ascend to an awareness. Your knowing is part of this developmental skill within the alchemy that is so, in my opinion, the most important thing, to be able to vary your tangibility from what construct that you are operating in, whether it's the psyche of intellect versus intuitive, something greater, a resonance that goes beyond all of this realm, that you are able to discern and affirm what that is. And that comes in that alchemical processes, because it is then fundamentally validating and reconfirming your knowing of the truth through that potential. And so when people manipulate and they tell you, they dismiss, and they say, well, it's just fear itself. This is very true. But unless you believe it from the very core of who you are, and so a lot of people are like, well, how do you, Jifu, how is it possible that you get to this point? Well, fearlessness is something that I entered into this realm with and became very, very aware of at a very young age. And I embodied it as a truth to my knowing. Now, that's conceptual to most people. They are bound by the construct of the human condition. I'm emotional. I'm suggestible. I'm manipulative. And I always remind people, when you're emotional, you're suggestible. This is an instant entry level into manipulating your perception of reality through that portal. That's how it works. So heaven and hell are very real. Sometimes I can have fire sales on this very experience where I'll see it for 6 or 10, a year straight. And I'm dealing with people that are contending with these entities that are commandeering their very state of reality. And then there will be no exhibit any sort of evidence of these energies, because this is the path that I walk on. And if you go deeper within the Tao Te Ching, we make it very clear. You cast the wicked away, you draw that person closer. You realize the truth. And the truth is, the true nature of all things is their selflessness, the love. And once you embody that, even from an alchemical processes or something as simplistic as, physics, like attracts like, with this concept of laws of attraction, you understand the magnetic fluidity. You're drawing this in, and you are basically expanding part of the bellows, which is what we speak of, and you are all things and nothing at the same time. And so you have that moment where you hit the Wu Ji between the breath in and the breath out, and guess what? You're the now. You're perfection. You remember. And people desire this and pursue religion, they pursue belief systems, they pursue an understanding of what is the nature of their purpose. And that question, I want to know, is the very seed to that journey for a Taoist seeker. So within Taoism, the potential is yin and yang. And I have over 171 teachers that I tap into, and I have a very clear conversation with at will. And that's a dialogue that I have that is the monologue of the Tao. So that dialogue is a facet of the diamond that we call perfection. So when I have conversation with Latsu and I'm transcribing information and I'm putting it into this present moment, and from James's own admission, it may be his inspiration to write a book, his ability to create artwork. These are transmissions of a higher resonance that is giving you the potential to create, to be present right now. And so there are, Li Gong is the god of thunder within Taoism. And he is also the punisher of all evil doing. So any alchemists or black magic practitioners, they always end up fearing this very energy, this very god, because he's going to end up on your doorstep. That chill we're getting right now is that knowing. And it's very tangible. Yet I may never call on him. It might be 10 years. I want to have a conversation. Yet that energy is very real and very tangible. The potential is limitless. And I think that as a human being, you have the entry, the portal to potential. And guess what that is? The imagination. And then all of a sudden, you have the ability to either be imprisoned by it or liberated. And that is for you, the seeker, to decipher that and determine that through your journey. And the more and more you listen to conversations like the one we're having today, the more and more you give yourself insight to that very knowing. Does that answer the question?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, there's different types of fear. The fear is used in early or Middle English as a kind of, in a sense of respect as well. Like the fear of God is not necessarily, it's the sense of awesome or as well. So, I do say, well, the only thing you should fear is about losing your soul, losing control of your soul or spirit. I mean, that's the one thing you have to do. You have to that's what you have to look after. You have to make sure that pilot light doesn't go out, and that's your job. And all the other things, we can fail on them, but this is the thing that we can't do, and this is what's been attacked in a mass way, in a mass individual way. So anything I say or you say is meant to feed or to help people in that thing, to realize that they have that's in them. That's the gift that they've been given. There's a few concepts that come up in relation to which I think are important and that tie into what you're saying and what I've been suggesting. That I've become more and more focused on the significance of the idea of sacrifice and how absolutely critical it is. So I'll be interested to hear your Taoist or Daoist take on this. Now, if we look at all the religions, it's a curious thing, also in the mythic sense, about the significance of sacrifice. In the Promethean legend, I'm very critical of people that are Prometheans, because Prometheus is the mythology of the military-industrial complex. So stealing fire from the gods, having power, taking risk, don't care about the consequence, using firepower, only firepower as the key thing, without the balance of the other things. Willing to see things beforehand, but not afterwards, to evaluate them and balance them out. This is Prometheus is the model. It is the modern representation of what would in the past been a satanic thing. It's very close to that. Inspiration from Marx, for Karl Marx, is there in relation to the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer, all that. Prometheus is the figure that they see as a kind of religious figure, even though it's a mythic figure. It's not a figure that exists. It's not a figure that appeared to anybody ever. It's a convenient fiction that's used to draw together the power of fire on its own. Now, Prometheus's problems, one of them was when he begins to fool Zeus and by giving him, the bad sacrifice. And this is a theme that's critical. This is the same root as the problem with Cain and Abel, that God isn't happy with the sacrifice presented by Cain. It's not good enough. And you begin to say, initially, when you encounter it on a literal level, you say, well, why should an all-powerful force be concerned with the sacrifice that is given to them? They have everything. What's so significant about this? So there's something in all these stories that suggest that sacrifice is the primary thing, the willingness to give of yourself, to give of your harvest, to give something. And even in the most difficult stories in the Bible, where God asks someone to sacrifice their son, and they have to be ready to sacrifice their children. And we see a transition. We see a transition in this, a movement away from the idea of of blood sacrifice, of sacrifice, of human sacrifice. And this is a key division in relation to the concepts of the world. We see a moving away in the Christian thing, where we have, if you like, a vicarious sacrifice, where we have this a descent and a representation of a sacrifice, which is the basis of the Mass. Jung has written about that. He said that the Tridentine, the Latin Mass, was one of the most profound anthropological kind of contributions, because it embodies the idea of sacrifice. There's some fundamental aspect in humans that need, or there's something expressed in that which is a very, very difficult thing to put your finger on. Now, you might, if you look at theories of evolution, they're based on competition, but people like Martin Novak, he has written as a mathematician explaining that actually cooperation is a key bit of evolution. We wouldn't have had our evolution without cooperation, and it's been left out of the equation. So that actually cooperation is more powerful than this competitive thing in the long run. And this is where the genius of humans resides in. And this cooperation involves sacrifice. So I will forego something so that you can get something, so we mutually benefit. There's a game theory, there's mathematical proofs of these things. Or I just forego something so that you get a benefit, or the mother sacrifices for the child. It's inherent in the relationship. It's inherent in what they do. They sacrifice. They become selfless. And it's true that sacrifice, the existence of sacrifice, and we can there's mathematical proofs of some of these things, that we benefit from cooperation, in a general sense. And it kind of proves the utility or the significance of selflessness. And associated with this, you have the idea, and one of your viewers asked about that in relation to ego and how this fits into the thing. A lot of spiritual practices are associated with releasing yourself from attachments, as you talked about. The most dominant example is in relation to spiritual possession, is a very graphic example. But there are whole gradations of spiritual possession. There's possession, and there's ideological possession, where you get a whole system of thinking in, and then there's technological possession, where you give all your attention to something else. There's a whole spectrum of ways that you begin to become burdened, and spiritual burdens are another description of those possessory forces. So a lot of traditions are releasing yourself from those attachments, so the selflessness is associated with an escape from the material world into the fullness of that potential that you're talking about. To be able to understand that, we have to let go of things. We can't be like the monkey with their hand in the hole in the sandbank that won't release, because they have something in their hand and they get stuck, and we can trap them in that sense. Or the Bushmen used to trap them that way, because they knew that their greed would surmount their self protection, or their self awareness. So this idea I see in the Tao Te Ching also, about explaining how this selflessness, the humility, and the sacrifice becomes a very important thing. And we have to understand this. We have to understand what sacrifice is. Now, last point, I believe, I was going to mention human flourishing. Human flourishing sounds great. It sounds wonderful. And we can go back, we can find it in ancient Greek, and it's meant something else. But human flourishing in deep ecology means population reduction, the reduction of human population. So people, when they're saying, I believe in human flourishing, they're often talking about the reduction of human population. And that's what the human flourishing is. And that's one of the principles of deep ecology. So this is one of the inversions. My argument about Promethean man and woman, but it was often described in terms of Promethean man, but the Promethean human, is that philosophy leads to and will lead to the sacrifice of the human race itself, the literal sacrifice. That the traditions that were found among the Canaanites, there was a Dublin archaeologist who went over in the 1900s, and he excavated in places like Gezer and that, and he discovered that, or he argued that there was ritual sacrifice of infants burned and that from the remains. This is disputed, but it was believed by a lot of people, or that tradition certainly went there. And traditions in the Jewish tradition, the Gehenna, the hell, was associated with child sacrifice by fire that was identified with a particular place. And so in many senses, there was a reaction against this by the other tradition. And the sacrifice was associated with Moloch and Baal, and all these figures that we see coming back in Hollywood, Bohemian Grove. It's a direct reference to a very dark tradition of sacrifice. And then when we put that with the Promethean idea that risk-taking, technological power is the dominant thing, and getting technological power, firepower, I believe that we have the seeds for the sacrifice of the human race, which is why this post-humanist philosophy emerges. So getting that idea of sacrifice correct in relation to the connection of heaven and earth is critical. So I wonder what from your background and your learning on this issue, how would you articulate or frame ideas of sacrifice?
Well, that's a fundamental part of a Daoist seeker's cultivation. Yet it comes in this form as an incantation that the Jade Emperor teaches, and I use it. A power abundant in its giving you will receive, unifying the body with the spirit with the energy, bringing heaven to earth, transcending all is one, one is all, revealing perfection manifest. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. That is your gift. That is your offering. Now, that's where you get into the visceral response that is that at a subatomic level within this flesh and blood, this energetic potential that validates this giving is receiving, the understanding of servitude. By serving others, you serve yourself. The selflessness that comes from the maternal instinct. Moreover, when you step away from the idea of reproduction, reproducing, creating, you remove yourself from this empathy that is the main line to human existence. And when you remove that, you lose sight. The selflessness that instantly is gathered by any human being that is a parent is like the most ultimate realization of this understanding of all is one, one is all. And when you sacrifice to your child, knowing that without a fraction of a second, you would give your life, your breath, your food, the shirt off your back, is the evidence of how powerful that is. And it brings it back to the mother. So within Taoism, your gift is your offering. And ritual is so very potent. The structure and the method of that and the cultivation of that is so ancient. It goes from generation to generation for thousands of years. But furthermore, it started with the evidence of the mentorship of one of my teachers, the Jade Emperor, and the Yellow Emperor, who was also being acknowledged through Chinese history as the creator of Chinese culture as we know it. So his realization through his communication with the universe, the whispers of the universe that magnetized the Yellow Emperor to the earth for 18 days and nights, downloading all the information that creates the construct and the infrastructure of Chinese culture as we know it, the 7 generations of language transformation in variables from simplified to traditional, Cantonese to Mandarin as we know it, all the way back to the Yellow Emperor's creation of pictographs through this messaging the universe was handing him. This all comes back to understanding when a Taoist steps forward to their altar and they offer flowers, they offer candles. I can literally, I kid you not, James, when I put a 7-day candle, I have many candles through my temple. A 7-day candle should burn for 7 days. A candle that I offer in my altar will burn, a 7-day candle will burn in less than 24 hours. And then you go, holy moly. What is the potential of this? This understanding of this sacrifice, this surrender. But in essence, the truth is you are giving and receiving. This, can you trust yourself to realize that when you surrender, as a Taoist would, a Taoist seeker, the very core of their path is to accept and allow all things. That is the Wu way, the very essence of Wu way, effortless action, effortless effort, which is evident in water. It's evident that water goes where no man can go. This goes beyond the flesh and blood, the understanding that all the rivers return back to the ocean, the primordial mother. And so that sacrifice is really, are you able to recognize and realize that you are returning back to that primordial truth? And by you coming to your altar, your own ritual, your own cultivation, your own connection with that, that when you let go, all is received. As the Jade Emperor would say, when you accept you know nothing, you know everything. And that returns back to the bellows. We are contracting and expanding at all times. You're all things and nothing at the same time. It's like that Death Star moment with Luke Skywalker as he flies down to the Death Star, and that one shot that he gets. Can you access that? You can access it. It's abundant, timeless, endless, limitless, infinite. But are you filtering through all these labyrinths of perception, deception, manipulation, these parasites that are deflecting you from your own reflection? That is the real, the core of a seeker is to return back to that. Does that answer the question?
Oh, absolutely. I thought your incantation was superb. Right on, it answered it through you. So it reflected my perception superbly. So and you delivered it fantastically. So exactly that's the point. The one knows that these are the issues. The answers are there, and the master appears when the student is ready. The same thing, the principle applies in relation to understanding the truth of something, or understanding the different levels of the Tao Te Ching, or of some of these things that seem simple. You hear the first, well, that's doesn't mean anything, but when you come back with awareness, you begin to see how something is chosen very specifically because it's true, and it follows on from other things. So yeah. So that certainly accords with my view, again from slight different emphasis, but that again referring to the tradition. And as I said, the same thing. Not the modern Catholic Mass, but there's a lot of dispute because they're trying to ban totally the traditional Mass. And it's interesting that figures that didn't, they might have been brought up Catholic, or but they left it behind, were horrified at the demise, for example, in the French state when they began to ban practice of religion. They're very anti-religious in many senses in France, despite its history. And there's a reason why they're anti-religious. But Marcel Proust, for example, explained that you can't have these great cathedrals without understanding what the ceremony was that happened in them, and what it meant. And as Jung studied it, now, I believe I have a controversial view, perhaps, which I'll explain some other time, about why Jung was interested in understanding the Mass. But again, it's all about sacrifice. And for Catholics that have never been to the traditional Mass, I think you owe it yourself before it is banned, if it's going to be banned, to have a look at it. There's a confusion in people's mind between conservative and traditional. And they mix them up, and this is not how it's being regarded, even in the different factions in the Catholic Church. The traditionalist is interested in that tradition and what's embodied in the tradition, exactly as someone like yourself is in relation to the Taoists. Whether that translates into conservative views is a different issue, but they're separable, because the traditionalist understands that these things probably happened for a particular reason and have a layer of meaning that's encapsulated that you can't necessarily access quite easily. So it takes time. But you made me think of another issue that came to mind when I was thinking about your perspectives and my perspectives, and it's about who we are. I mean, these are kind of easy questions, maybe, when someone like yourself or myself has been the essence of the questions in some sense, but not really when you start off. And the contrast between a Promethean view, as well as the creation of humankind, and the view of say in the Roman myths about who made the human. And in that we have Cura or Care, who fashions the human out of earth. Now, in every tradition, the human is made out of earth in some way, or in some time they're fashioned out of earth, and then we have the spirit. So in this case, it's Jupiter, or gives spirit to this figure. But there's debate about who this figure belongs to, and when they're on the earth, they belong to Cura or Care, because she was the one that made them. She was the mother of the human. So that defines the human. The human is defined by, that's who they are. So the compassion or care is not something, it's not an epiphenomenon, it's something that we learn, some add-on. It's the essence of who we are. And this is what the Daoist tradition says, in my view, what the true Christian tradition says, what the Buddhist tradition says is this love is not the self-love, it's not the do what you want, licensed love. It's the nature of who we are, which is defined by selflessness in some way. It doesn't mean nobody can be totally selfless, but it's in relation to our inherent disposition. It's the basis of Goethe's Faust and Dr. Faust, and we see this figure care, which is sorry, and that we could have a long tangent. I won't go in it, but he understands that this idea of care and care in the human psyche is critical. And then we get to the question, well, what do we mean by this thing? And this is a fundamental issue, because my argument is that what is happening is that the human is being exteriorized. We're being turned inside out, pending endosymbiosis. Your mobile phone, I don't have one, but your mobile phone, if you do have one, is there, and then it's going to be inside, and your body is then turned into the electrical system. You're joined to the system. You cannot exist in the same way once that happens. And this is what digital currency and a focus, single point of attention, is all geared towards linking you up to the system. And we're losing human qualities, human functions, all the abilities about interacting with people, appreciating the people that we see before us. Now, I'm not Luddite about this. I understand the benefit. We're talking to each other, but in relation to the negative, insidious side, the dark side, as you talked about the poles and the duality, the dark side, of course, is that this threatens to govern us. That the objective, in my view, of this global governance system is to govern you down to the neural level, totally. That's what it is. I'm convinced, and I'll explain that in my latest book. And what we're doing is relinquishing qualities that we have, even the ability to talk to someone on an informal level when you're walking down the street. And it's difficult when they're talking on a phone, and they're distant, they're not in the now, as you would say. We're losing things, and we're losing other deeper abilities. So we see as well that functions that are in the human body are being put into the exterior. And this is the fundamental principle of the theory of evolution. If we go back to the early evolutionary theorists and the idea of what life is, this is a fundamental. It's been very difficult for philosophers, for scientists to define what life is. And if you look at the early evolution of Spencer and people like that, they say that life is the accommodation of the inner to the external. Now, they mean physically. So the consequence of that was that if you look at Richard Dawkins, the extended phenotype, like a beaver creates a dam, the world out there is a reflection of our genes. And that's true, but it's also a reflection of the power structures, as opposed to what it would be if you were a Taoist living up in the hills in China, living in accord with nature and resonance with nature and your fellow human beings. You come to a different place. So what's happening is all our human functions are being sucked out. That, as described by various writers, AI is an extractive industry. It's extracting, exteriorizing us into the external world, and then will literally allow us be penetrated by the machines itself. So through the process of endosymbiosis, we're over. We can't exist as autonomous beings, and we're being made more dependent. And it comes back then to the question of who we are, what we think we are, and what features define us. And this is where the care things become important, because we're being told that everything is going to be cared for by the technical apparatus outside of us, this medical, biometric, biological, total control system that will govern us down to the neural level. And then we have to go back to the great thinkers. And another one that comes to mind taken from the Catholic tradition, which is interesting. But she was born Jewish, was Edith Stein, and she became a saint in the Catholic Church, although she was a Jewish convert, and she died in Auschwitz. And she was an assistant to Husserl, who was the basis of phenomenology, and one of the other assistants was Martin Heidegger. Heidegger, who wrote about technology and being. And there was an interesting conflict between Stein's view before she came to Catholicism and Heidegger's view. His view of being was circumscribed by it being located only in the time you live on this earth, whereas her view of being was located in the transcendent idea of eternal life. And your view of what life is dependent on that, and it's fundamentally, it's fundamentally affected. So people say, "Oh, agnostic, my mind is open." Your mind is not open if you cannot see yourself as a transcendent being. And she wrote a PhD on empathy. That was the subject that she focused on. This was a big issue for Jewish philosophers, particularly in Germany. There was a lot of interest in what was the nature of empathy. And she also studied in Breslau, or Wrocław now in Poland, under William Stern, who wrote about distinction between people and things. He was the father of child psychology. He was the father of Gunther Stern, who changed his name to Gunther Anders, who wrote about technology and later on the obsolescence of humans, the obsolescence of man, various translations. He was married, Gunther Anders, the son, was married for a while to Hannah Arendt, who wrote about totalitarianism and the banality of evil. So we have an example from that milieu in Germany in particular of a deep investigation of what the human is and how they relate to other people. And also the therapists or the psychotherapists that went to the United States, there was a number of them that were refugees, Jewish refugees. This was a central issue. Some of the founders of psychotherapy in the United States, and this was about the relationship between two people. And it's quite amazing that Stein didn't have to end up in. She didn't hide herself from the Nazis, and she didn't have to end. She could have ran away. But she believed that these principles were deeper than all of those things that were going on around her, that the essence of empathy had to be manifest. She had written from a theoretical perspective about I, you, and how that relates to the divine thing. And these are things that we have to go back to. So I'm very interested in us re-understanding that care is a function of our humanity that has to be expressed. Take the Good Samaritan scenario where you're walking down the road and you see a fella lying on the street. So in the Good Samaritan story, the Samaritan helps the person even though they don't have an affinity with them. So it's interpersonal, it's direct, it's the exercise of those deeper elements, including all the matrix of feeling, emotion, tension. All those things are exercised, they're applied, as opposed to you walk down the road and you say, "Oh, there's a fella beaten up. I'm going to go home and contribute to some charity against this sort of thing." You create distance. Or in that famous cartoon, the guy comes around, he sees the person on the ground having been obviously beaten and battered, and he says, "Oh, the person who did this needs my help," meaning the perpetrator. And that's really what's happening. There's an inversion. So in this, there's a fundamental thing that was being lost and being transferred about the fundamental disposition of care as an absolutely fundamental starting point. And I think you've touched on this, but I was wondering whether that as a concept or fits into, or how you see it fits in, or how you would articulate those from your perspective.
Oh, it's like this desensitizing, sort of like numbing of reality, which removes you from that mother, removes you from that empathy, removes you from that mainline acceptance that we are all one. And when you do not have empathy for another human being, you're immediately, that's a red flag to identify you're being commandeered by something. You're being commandeered by the parasite of perception of your reality through the manipulation of your environment. Your environment is giving you this idea that you don't need to reproduce, you don't need to live another day. You just need to let go of all things that identify with human expression and surrender to, as you will put it, the mechanism, the big daddy, the GOV. There's a construct that is being perpetrated within your lens that goes from generation to generation to generation to generation through human history, that has become more clear, I believe, in the last 100 years than ever before. And more recently, in the last couple of decades, you are starting to realize that there is no turning your back on it. It's happening. It's happening on a daily basis. And from that, you start to realize, well, that selflessness, everyone's experienced it once. That's when you're accessing the mother, where for whatever zero reason, you are reaching out and in servitude for someone else, a place, a person, a thing, whatever it is. You do not have an agenda. You do not have a thought of what is the purpose. What am I going to obtain from acting selfless, from giving help to another human being? What am I going to get out of it? Where's the manipulative angle to it? But people have been touched on this, but more often than not, they then are given back the idea that, no, I need to process that. I need to think about it. This is this thought process. I got to think. Within Daoism, it's very clear. If you are thinking, you are not knowing. If you are knowing, you are feeling. That is the thing that overrides everything. That's when you're in that sweet spot, the Wu way. You're right there in the flow where you are one with God, you are one with Tao, you're one with Buddha, and it is transmitting through the very operation of this physical body, and it will come out in an expression of selflessness and contributing to mankind. And empathy is a huge realization of that. And so emotions are the very distraction and distortion, but also are the validator and realization, as we talk about the contracting and expanding, right back to the bellows. So how is it that you are able, as an individual that's really part of a collective that is the spiritual consciousness that James and I are talking about, how is that access, that potential, instead of being removed more and more using the technocrats sort of like a disassociation with the human being by this idea that everything you need is within a cell phone. Everything you need is within your laptop. You don't have to have a community. You don't have to have relationships. You go into a social setting and you sit down and you look around and people are having family dinner, 4 kids and husband and wife, and they're all in their phones. They're not communing. They're not participating in the collective. They are separate. They are being removed more and more from what is the true nature of prayer, the true nature of having that communal moment where you have, family dinner at the end of the day. You sit forth, you hold hands, you take a prayer, you thank God, you thank Tao, you thank Buddha, whatever it is. You are coming together and remembering this very moment, remembering the power of that eternal, maternal truth and the power of God, the power of Tao. And these sort of simplistic things continue to distract and detach people. And, you know, something as simplistic as realizing that this physical flesh is perfection. It's a gift from God, gift from the mother, gift from Tao. And that you can actually reset your physical pathways for regeneration and healing instantaneously with something as simple within Taoism. We call it resting. Most people call it fasting. This idea of to set your path to really optimize your potential, a Taoist seeker will have a meal one every second day. And you will feel like you are superhuman. You won't feel like you are tapping into your potential. And so the distraction of how to pollute and dilute the potential, and the fact that it is perfection, and you do everything from, you know, taking drugs, drinking, eating bad foods, doing all this stuff, and you still have this human potential that is like showing you, my goodness, no matter what, it keeps coming back, it keeps rebounding back. And then the idea of the medical institution separating you once again from your inherent knowing that you have everything you need to heal completely. You then put your attention to someone else telling you, this is how we're going to help you at least maintain whatever sickness that you've acquired, and we'll attempt to move you into a very miserable, dismal, slow death. And then, of course, that's the end of your journey. Don't ever believe that there's something greater out there. Don't ever believe that you have a connection to be that. Know that. And so, you know, the medical institution, you know, industrial complex, all of this is layered down into, I have zero faith in medicine. It's all constructed to distract you from your knowing. And, you know, I get acupuncturists, doctors, psychiatrists, judges, healers, light workers, you know, they all return back to the energetic potential, because there's nothing more powerful than that when you return to your knowing. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yeah. You know, as I said, I may have said it before, though. It reminds George Burns on his 90th birthday, and he said he has a cigar and a glass of brandy every day, and they say, well, what does your doctor think about that? And he said he's dead.
So, I mean, James, you're bringing such a point, because what is your potential? What do you believe in? I always tell people, it's like, if you walk under a ladder and you believe you're going to have bad luck, then that's exactly what you're going to have. If you walk under a ladder and you believe you're going to have good luck, then that's exactly what you're going to have. The distortion and the detachment of a human being and their inherent knowing of that maternal empathy and embodying that and having this selflessness is the very power of what you're experiencing right now, and you detach from it. And so George Byrne and a cigar and whiskey is whatever he makes it to be. That's where you get the anomaly. You get the one where, oh, my grandfather was 120 years old. He had smoked a pack of cigarettes and drank a bottle of whiskey every day, because that is what kept him in his happiness. It had nothing to do with what was the potential. You destroy that potential once you're given this idea that your emotions control you.
Yeah, I was going to make a bigger return or development to the points that you made, or you made me think of a number of points that I think are important. That what we have been plagued with since Victorian times, and it was associated with the growth of when the theory of evolution was taken on board, and the scientists said we can use this. Now remember, there was two theories of natural selection that was presented in the Linnaean Society in 1858 in London. One was by Darwin, the other one was by Wallace, but we don't hear about Wallace because Wallace had spirit, and he said it couldn't happen without spiritual intervention. So he was, didn't want that, because they wanted to take spirit out so they could control people. So as they took spirit out, then they had to have explanations to fit in what was taken out. So they began to work with the X Club in 1863-64 with Huxley and his mates to stop spirit being talked about. So they'd already kind of sidelined kind of religion, said we don't want any of this spirit stuff. So that was where you got psychology. Psychic forces were defined as a necessary response because they didn't want to, they had to still explain the phenomenon that people were seeing. So they had to get replacement content. And ultimately, we come up with psyche and consciousness. Now, we have the hard problem of consciousness. I keep on saying, but people don't really understand what I'm saying. There's no hard problem of consciousness if you have spiritual consciousness. So they have a table, they cut off two legs of the table, and the table is like this, and they have to accommodate the things on the table, but they won't fit because they keep sliding off. You have to go back to what you took out in order to make the thing work. But as they began to take out all the things, there was replacements that came in. So we had the growth of sentimentalism. And there's a lot about this. We see it in, about feeling. Oh, I feel that, you see it. There's a lot written about Dickens and sentimentalism. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it was about that. And you focused on this distinction about feelings and emotions and all that. But this, to evoke something which was very shallow and about the sense that it's about how you feel about other people as opposed to a deep empathy. It was about the kind of reaction to it. And associated with that was a degree of sensationalism, that it was about the sensation. So a lot of talk about spiritual development now in a kind of new age way is associated with the sensation of something that they perceive as spiritual, which often facilitated by drugs. I saw that it's a sensation of something. It's a physiological stuff. It's not actually entering into the different domains that you and I would accept exist and are fundamentally part of the connection between heaven and earth. They may enter into different spaces, but the sensation is fundamentally important. So people say, "Oh, I had a great whatever." It's that they're referring to the lower substrate reception of a range of experience without necessarily being able to contextualize them in greater frameworks. Because if you're entering into the lower astral domains, well, that's where you're going to, and these may not be the ones that you want to necessarily stay in, and especially if you're concerned about entities and this. So associated with that, and this is an issue that someone may ask, and I heard in one of your talks you were talking about the father and the role of your mother, and so someone might say, I'm not doing devil's advocate, but I'm putting the thing on it. Then someone might say, well, the present emphasis on the feminine may be a continuation of this single mother kind of idea of the end of the family. It may perpetuate an elevated idea of the feminine, which is part of the change, and in particular asks the question, well, where is the father that has been kicked out, or what is the higher role of the father figure? Because of course people forget that when we talk about Mother Earth and all this, that you can see this in Newgrange. I got the chance to be in this building on the 21st of December when it's 5,000 years old at least. And on the 21st day of December, shortest day of the year, the sun shines from its extreme on the horizon over the hills in County Meath into the through a roof box into the chamber, like a kind of penetration of the sun god into Mother Earth. Telling you that these guys, so you're in there in the dark watching this beam of light come as the guys constructed it 5,000 years ago. It's kind of, there's a number of different readings of course, but it's consistent with what the African idea of a kind of sun father and the earth mother and uniting and mating. It's also the return, because for the mystics this was a pathway home. It was a path back to the sun. And of course, December 21st, Christmas, it's this, the turn of the return, the resurrection. And this exit and return, the breath in and out, is the very basis of all Irish monasticism, even literally in a journey away and come back. It was manifested in everything they did. So the question that I'd like to ask in relation, and your translation channeled of the Tao Te Ching has a correct emphasis on the feminine and this force, and that's why it fundamentally accords. As I said, we can corroborate it by its. We could also look at the sophiological tradition and Sophia, which is in the Gnostic tradition, or the Virgin Mary, and other people no doubt put Isis and other things. There's a whole range of. So then the question is, at the higher level, not on not on a sociological level, not about the role of father and mother. Where does the father symbol, archetype, power, reality, deity fit into the Daoist, into your worldview, based on your translation of the Tao Te Ching?
Oh, that's such a great question, because I mean we always refer to the mirroring effects of everything, and when we understand as a Taoist seeker that yin and yang is within everything, is present within it, everything can be all things and nothing at the same time, the evidence of the father is the reflection of the mother, and vice versa. And so that energy potential of the sun and the energy potential of the earth is the very evidence of these energies. And from a father perspective is, of course, the seed and the growth of the conception and birth of human life. And so within that, it would be representative as a Taoist seeker. Within the yang potential, it comes directly from the sun. Within the yin potential, it comes directly from the primordial mother. And so the father is the sun. The mother is basically all things, and returns to, when you are looking at yourself, you have the evidence of the two, and it will be representative within the union of man and woman. And so you will see that in your journey. Is it something that becomes very problematic in today's society? Absolutely. The confusion of the human's psyche is being twisted as we speak on a second-by-second basis, creating these labyrinths and mazes of definitions and pronouns and nouns and this and that. And you will be confused with the simplicity of returning back to these elements that were part of the creation. And once that happens, the creation of the cosmos, these two energies are quite evident, and they come in that form. The sun is the form of a man. The earth is the form of a woman. And you will see that in your very journey. And so you can balance these dualities, the polarizing effect of these energies, and ultimately the seeker's realization is that they're everything and nothing at the same time. So that means that their ability to access the potential of both of these energies are present within the man and the woman. And that's never to be forgotten. You cannot deconstruct that. On a humanist level, that is not just symbolic, but is the very presence of these energies on planet Earth, is through these forms. That's why it's so critical to not lose sight of that union of man and woman, and understanding that in today's society, you're being collectively mind screwed by all these other ways to perceive your reality that do not distract from the flesh and blood that you've been handed, and the chromosomes that are part of the foundation of the evidence of what this anchor to this reality is. And so to be told that you are not that, or you are a variable of that, or that doesn't exist, these two very clear energies that are in everything, yin and yang is in everything, that you cannot step away from that. To say that is the deluded state. To divert from that very knowing of that polarizing effect will basically confuse and deter a seeker from ever finding the truth and returning to who they are, understanding that union. But it always emerges from that primordial mother and that creation of that through the whispers of the universe, and realizing that that was created from the sun and the earth. And so
And
people just don't get it. Does that make sense? Does that answer the
oh,
question?
yeah. I mean, there's a kind of ironic thing in that the pagan approach, as evidenced in the in Ireland, in the tradition that's there in the built environment, is the same story as the angel appearing to the Virgin Mary and the Father, God, and Holy Spirit coming in to the matrix, and see, I mean, as I said, the parallels are so the there's a thing that people don't understand about early Christianity or whatever else happened after things, but in Ireland in particular, they integrated the previous knowledge. They had the sun and the cross. That's where you get the Celtic cross from. So they integrated them, and they brought magical traditions as well into early Christianity. And I think they were persecuted a bit within the church structures, because we always have this yin and yang within the institutions as well that people forget about. They say, oh, that's one thing, but it's not. If you look carefully enough, you see the evidence of this, what would be consistent with Daoist thinking in the early church, and particularly in the monastic tradition, decentralized, and even going out to nature, going out to rough spots, going up the mountains, forming into, it's very familiar, if you like, if you come from a Daoist tradition. When I came and when I looked at the Tao Te Ching again, when I was studying law, again, I approached it with a different mindset. Okay, I've studied all this stuff. What does this have to say about this stuff? And the thing that it's very, very good at, it was the paradox of over-regulation. And once you're regulating so much, you have no regulation. There's no rules. So they were very good on spotting that you cannot achieve things by over-regulation. And this is a disastrous bureaucratic system that we have entered. And one of the things that Hannah Arendt was explaining, and she was looking at, and so was Gunther Anders, who was married to her for a while, William Stern's son, was the banality of evil, and Eichmann and the Germans and the Nazis, and the banality of evil. Now, and in that was the idea of bureaucracy. Once you get in a system, you can distance yourself from the consequence. So this is the distance again. It's the distance. So I'm doing my job. I'm doing it very, very good. Doesn't matter. You're sending people, to a concentration camp. All these, the worst of the Nazi groups, the Einsatz group in Poland, and that executed huge amounts of people. It was one of the reasons why they introduced mass murder, because it was too much for they were doing so much of it hand to hand that the German soldiers couldn't take it. But they had a huge amount of PhDs in them, so a lot of them, they weren't lower level, they were PhDs, and a remarkable amount of it. And part of this is that there is evidence that people who have a higher level of education are more susceptible to control. But this bureaucratic system, and especially with scientists and that, it can bring the absolute worst out. And the Tao Te Ching was very, very good in relation to explaining that overregulation, and knowing that once you have this overregulation, something's not working. It's not going to, and the implication will be that it will collapse.